You're turning down our offer?
Good luck finding something better in this market, the department head said, his smirk widening as he leaned back in his leather chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile conference room as his colleagues exchanged knowing glances. I clutched my presentation folder tighter, feeling the familiar heat of indignation rise in my chest. My expertise in blockchain security architecture commands a higher market value, I replied evenly. 7 years of specialized experience in financial cybersecurity isn't reflected in this compensation package. He chuckled, tapping his pen against my resume dismissively. We have dozens of candidates who would jump at this opportunity without hesitation. Perhaps you've overestimated your importance in today's saturated tech market. Something crystallized inside me. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and looked him directly in the eyes. No, I haven't. But you've certainly underestimated it. Walking out of that building, I heard their laughter echo behind me. 4 weeks of interviews, 3 technical presentations, and countless hours of preparation, all ending like this. My savings account showed 2 months of expenses remaining, and the tech industry was tightening budgets everywhere. I never imagined that within 48 hours, everything would change. Before I tell you how I turned that humiliation into the most transformative career victory of my life, I want you to remember a moment when someone undervalued your expertise. That burning sensation in your chest when you knew you deserved better, but others made you question your worth. Hold on to that feeling, because what happens next might give you the courage to stand your ground when someone tries to diminish your value. My name is Anna Blackwood, and until 8 months ago, I was the unsung architect behind one of the most sophisticated financial security systems in the banking industry. The kind of infrastructure that protects billions in transactions daily. A framework that reduced cyber attack success rates by 89% while maintaining seamless user experience. The kind of innovation that made headlines in cybersecurity journals, with my supervisor's name prominently featured while mine appeared nowhere. I'd always been the meticulous developer, the one who stayed late debugging code while others networked at industry conferences. My parents, both first-generation immigrants who'd built a successful accounting firm in Chicago, had taught me that excellence speaks for itself. Let your work be your voice, my mother always said. For years, I believed that. Until the day I watched my breakthrough, a proprietary encryption algorithm that took me 2 years to perfect, being presented at the Global FinTech Security Summit by my team lead Marcus. He stood at the podium fielding questions about my methodology, accepting praise for my discovery while I sat in the audience, invisible. I had developed the multi-layer authentication protocol. I had solved the quantum-resistant encryption challenge. I had sacrificed weekends and holidays perfecting the implementation. Yet there I was, reduced to a footnote in his presentation, with valuable input from our development team. That night in my hotel room, I made myself a promise. Never again would I allow my contributions to be diminished. Never again would I let someone else take credit for my brilliance. Never again would I stay silent about my value. So when the opportunity came from CyberVault Solutions, a rapidly growing fintech company with ambitious expansion plans, I was cautiously optimistic. Their recruitment process had been rigorous: 5 technical interviews, a comprehensive security audit presentation, meetings with 3 different department heads. They seemed genuinely impressed by my portfolio. The department head, Stephen, had nodded appreciatively during my demonstration of real-time threat detection algorithms. Yet when the offer finally arrived, the salary was barely above what I'd made as a senior developer at my previous company, for a principal architect position requiring expertise that fewer than 100 people globally possessed. It was insulting. I prepared meticulously for the negotiation meeting. I researched industry standards, compiled salary data for comparable positions, practiced my talking points. I walked into that conference room ready to advocate for myself professionally. What I wasn't prepared for was ridicule. After that humiliating meeting, I sat in my car for 30 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Had I just made a catastrophic mistake? In a market where cybersecurity budgets were being slashed across the industry? My phone buzzed. A text from my younger brother, David. How did the negotiation go? I couldn't bring myself to respond immediately. Instead, I drove to my apartment, a modest 2-bedroom that suddenly felt financially daunting. As I heated leftover takeout for dinner, I finally called David. "You did what?" he exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Anna, in this economy? Are you insane?" They offered junior-level pay for principal-level work, I explained, pacing my living room. Stephen actually laughed when I countered with market rate. But your rent, your student loans. I'll figure it out. David sighed through the phone. Look, I support you standing up for yourself, but be realistic. Maybe call them back tomorrow, say you reconsidered. And start a job knowing I'm undervalued from day one? No thanks. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and applied to 12 positions. I scheduled 3 interviews for the following week. I updated my LinkedIn profile with my latest certifications. I calculated exactly how long my savings would last with strict budgeting, 67 days. Not ideal, but manageable. The next morning, I went for a run through Lincoln Park, pushing myself harder than usual, trying to outpace the doubt chasing me. Had I been arrogant? Was my work really as revolutionary as I believed? Maybe Marcus had been right to take the lead on presentations. Maybe my contribution wasn't as significant as I thought. No. I refused to let those thoughts take root. I knew my worth. I knew what I had accomplished. I knew what I could bring to any company smart enough to recognize it. 5 days passed. I prepared for my upcoming interviews, researching each company thoroughly. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. This time, I would address compensation expectations early in the process. Then at 3:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, my personal cell phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, this is Anna. Ms. Blackwood? This is James Chun, CEO of Cybervault Solutions. My breath caught. I'd never spoken with the CEO during the interview process. Had never even seen him in the building. I understand you declined our offer, he continued, his voice measured but curious. That's unusual for someone with your background. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. After you left, our CTO reviewed your security framework again. Specifically, your quantum-resistant encryption methodology. Our risk assessment team believes your protocol could revolutionize our client protection standards. The projected value is substantial, far more than we initially calculated. I sat down at my kitchen table, processing this reversal. Ms. Blackwood, are you there? Yes, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm considering what it would take for me to join a company where qualified candidates are openly mocked for knowing their market value. The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. I understand your hesitation, he finally said. What would it take to bring you on board? I'd thought about this moment, not specifically with Cybervault, but in general. What would it take for me to feel valued, to feel secure that my contributions wouldn't be exploited or diminished? I'd need 3 things, I said firmly. First, principal architect compensation at market rate plus 20% premium to account for the initial disrespect. Second, I lead the security division with full autonomy over protocol development and implementation strategies. Third, I want to implement transparent compensation standards across all technical departments, with particular attention to addressing gender disparities in cybersecurity. There was another pause. The first 2 are achievable. The third is unconventional for our industry. So was laughing at a qualified candidate, I replied. Yet here we are. Let me be clear, James said. You're asking for salary transparency across our entire technical organization? Yes, with specific focus on addressing historical undervaluation of women in cybersecurity. I've experienced it firsthand, and I won't be part of perpetuating it. He cleared his throat. I need to discuss this with the board. Can I call you back tomorrow? Of course. I'll await your call. 20 minutes after hanging up, an email arrived from Stephen, the department head who had smirked at my negotiation. Ms. Blackwood, I understand you spoke with our CEO. Please reconsider our offer. The Q4 security upgrade has already been scheduled around implementing your encryption protocol. We cannot meet our compliance deadlines without your expertise. I apologize if our previous meeting ended on an unprofessional note. I'd be happy to discuss terms that would make you comfortable joining our team. The contrast between his previous mockery and current desperation was striking. I closed my laptop without replying. That evening, my phone rang again. James Chun. Ms. Blackwood, I've spoken with the board. We'd like to accept your terms with one modification. We'll implement the transparent compensation standards, but we'd like to phase it in over 4 months to allow for proper review and adjustment of existing contracts. Would that be acceptable?
My heart raced.
I'd expected pushback, negotiation, perhaps a counteroffer, not immediate acceptance. That would be acceptable, I replied, trying to keep the surprise from my voice. I'd want to be directly involved in the review process.
Of course.
We'll have legal draft a contract tomorrow.
When can you start?
3 weeks later, I walked into CyberVault Solutions as the new principal security architect. My salary was 180% of the original offer, with a signing bonus that covered 4 months of expenses. My new office overlooked the Chicago River, with access to a state-of-the-art security lab for advanced testing. On my first day, I requested the compensation data for the entire technical division. When HR hesitated, I reminded them of my agreement with the CEO. The spreadsheet arrived in my inbox within 2 hours. The patterns were exactly what I'd suspected. Women in similar roles were earning 28% less than their male counterparts. Engineers with foreign surnames averaged 22% lower compensation than others with identical qualifications. The longest-serving employees, particularly those who weren't aggressive negotiators, were the most underpaid relative to new hires. I spent my first week learning the system architecture, meeting my team, and reviewing current security protocols. Everyone was polite, but I could sense their curiosity and perhaps skepticism. Who was this newcomer who'd negotiated directly with the CEO? What made her so special? On Friday afternoon, I called a division meeting. 43 employees crowded into the main conference room, including Stephen, who now technically reported to me, a fact he seemed to be struggling with based on his rigid posture and forced smile. "Thank you all for welcoming me this week," I began. "I've been impressed by the innovation happening here, but I've also identified areas where we can improve, not just in our technical processes, but in how we value our people." I clicked to my first slide, anonymized salary data showing the disparities. This is our current compensation structure with identifying information removed. As you can see, we have significant inconsistencies that don't correlate with experience, performance, or contribution. The room grew very quiet. People leaned forward, trying to identify where they might fall on the charts. Over the next 4 months, we'll be implementing transparent salary bands across all technical departments. Every role will have clear compensation ranges based on skills and experience, not on negotiation tactics or, I paused, making brief eye contact with Stephen, personal bias. After the meeting, several employees lingered, wanting to speak with me privately. A security analyst named Maya approached first, her hands fidgeting with her tablet. "What you showed us, is that really happening here?" she asked quietly.
"Yes, and we're going to fix it."
"I've been here 2 years," she confessed. "Last month, I discovered that my new colleague, a man with less experience, makes $18,000 more than me. When I mentioned it to Stephen, he said discussing salaries was unprofessional." By Monday morning, whispers were traveling through the building. Some employees were hopeful, others suspicious, and a few, particularly those benefiting from the current system, were visibly hostile. Stephen appeared at my office door at 8:45 a.m., not bothering to knock. "You've created quite the disruption," he said, claiming the chair across from my desk without invitation. "The leadership team is concerned about what you presented on Friday." "The data speaks for itself," I replied, continuing to review security protocols on my screen. "Data can be misinterpreted," he countered. "Some employees have more negotiation leverage based on their specialized skills. Others accept less because they value work-life balance or other benefits. Presenting raw numbers without context creates unnecessary tension." I finally looked up. "Is that what happened when I negotiated with you? I lacked specialized skills but valued work-life balance." His expression tightened. "That was different." "It wasn't. It was exactly the same pattern shown in that data. But we're moving forward with transparency regardless of how uncomfortable it makes those who've benefited from secrecy." He leaned forward. "Look, Anna, may I call you Anna? Ms. Blackwood is fine." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "Ms. Blackwood, you're new here. You don't understand our culture, our history. These kinds of dramatic changes could seriously impact morale." "Whose morale exactly?" The underpaid employees who just discovered they've been systematically devalued, or the overpaid managers who've benefited from that system?
Stephen stood up.
The CEO may have approved this initiative, but implementation requires cooperation from multiple departments.
My team controls the security budget allocations. Just something to consider. The threat was clear.
If I pushed forward with compensation equity, he would obstruct my projects.
Thank you for making your position so transparent, I said calmly. I appreciate knowing exactly where we stand.
After he left, I opened my email and drafted a message to James Chin detailing the conversation and requesting a meeting about departmental resource allocation.
I had no intention of being intimidated after coming this far. The following weeks were challenging.
While James publicly supported the compensation review, I discovered numerous roadblocks erected by middle management.
Meeting invitations mysteriously disappeared from my calendar. Critical security alerts were buried in group threads. Equipment orders for my lab were delayed due to processing errors. But I wasn't without allies.
Maya became my most valuable team member, brilliant at both cybersecurity and navigating company politics. She introduced me to others who had been marginalized, a senior developer named Carlos who'd been passed over for promotion 4 times despite his innovations, and a network specialist named Jennifer whose protocol improvements had been implemented company-wide without recognition. Together, we worked evenings and weekends refining my encryption framework for CyberVault's specific infrastructure needs. We converted an unused server room into an additional testing environment. When our equipment requests were delayed, we documented everything. Meticulously, every breakthrough, every obstacle, every accidental exclusion from critical meetings. 7 weeks into my tenure, I presented our first implementation results to the executive team. The data was irrefutable. My quantum-resistant protocol increased security effectiveness by 43% while reducing computational overhead by 31%.
The potential value to client protection was immeasurable. James was visibly impressed.
Several board members asked detailed questions about scalability and implementation timelines.
Only Stephen remained stone-faced, picking at perceived flaws in our testing methodology. These results are preliminary, he said dismissively.
Full implementation would require significant infrastructure modifications, expenses not accounted for in the current budget. Actually, I countered, pulling up a detailed spreadsheet, we've calculated complete implementation costs, including infrastructure upgrades, staff training, and a 20% contingency buffer. Even with these investments, the ROI would be realized within 6 months, with projected annual savings in breach prevention exceeding $8 million.
As the executives murmured appreciatively, Stephen's expression darkened.
There's still the matter of system downtime during implementation, he argued.
We can't afford security gaps on our main network.
Which is why, I continued, we've designed a phased rollout that utilizes our backup systems first, with only 2 4-hour maintenance windows required for the primary network.
I displayed the detailed timeline my team had prepared. The complete implementation plan is in your packets.
By meeting's end, the board had approved expedited funding for my project.
As we gathered our materials, James approached me. Exceptional work, Ms. Blackwood. This is exactly why we brought you on board.
Thank you. Though it's been challenging with certain administrative hurdles.
His eyebrows raised. Hurdles? Nothing my team can't handle, I replied. But I'd like to discuss them with you privately sometime.
Across the room, I noticed Stephen watching us, his jaw clenched tight. The next morning, I arrived to find my access credentials temporarily suspended from the main security server.
IT had no explanation. I called Maya, who let me in through her administrator account. It's escalating, she whispered. The project database was mysteriously corrupted last night. We lost access to 3 weeks of implementation data.
Do we have backups?
Yes.
Carlos has been mirroring everything to a secure external drive since your 3rd week here.
But they don't know that. I nodded. Good. Let's continue as if we've been set back. I want to see how far they'll go.
That afternoon, Stephen called an emergency department meeting, scheduling it during my previously arranged call with a major client. By the time I arrived, he was concluding his presentation. Which is why we'll be placing Ms. Blackwood's encryption project on temporary hold while we reassess resource allocation, he was saying as I entered. The preliminary data, while promising, requires more extensive verification before we commit to full implementation.
That's interesting, I said loudly from the doorway. Every head turned. Especially since the board approved expedited funding yesterday. Stephen's smile never wavered. Ah, Anna, Ms. Blackwood. Glad you could join us.
Yes, there was preliminary approval, but upon further review of departmental resources, I've determined we need to delay implementation until next quarter.
On whose authority?
As Director of Security Operations, I have final approval on all security implementations.
I hadn't realized he held that specific title. It explained his level of obstruction. I see.
And does the CEO know you're countermanding a board-approved initiative?
A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face.
James understands the complexities of security management. This isn't a cancellation, merely a postponement. Interesting, because the reason I missed the first part of this meeting was my scheduled call with Secure Core Industries, the hardware vendor already contracted for our implementation next week.
Murmurs rippled through the room. That contract hasn't been finalized, Stephen said sharply. It was signed this morning by James himself.
I held up my tablet showing the executed agreement.
Delivery begins Monday. The blood drained from Stephen's face.
Now, I continued, addressing the room, let's discuss the actual timeline we'll be working with. For the next 40 minutes, I outlined the implementation plan, assigning roles and establishing clear deliverables. Stephen remained silent, a forced smile fixed on his face, his eyes cold with fury. As the meeting concluded, he caught my arm at the door.
You've made a serious miscalculation, he said quietly. This company operated successfully long before you arrived. No one is irreplaceable. I gently removed his hand. That's where you're wrong, Stephen. Some people genuinely are irreplaceable. The trick is knowing which ones. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The hardware arrived as scheduled. My team worked tirelessly implementing the new security protocols. When subtle sabotage occurred, incorrect configuration files, missing authentication keys, mysterious system errors, we anticipated and countered each one. Meanwhile, the compensation review progressed.
Working with HR and finance, we identified 96 employees significantly underpaid compared to market rates and internal peers. The adjustment plan would cost the company approximately $2.8 million annually, substantial, but insignificant compared to the savings my security improvements would generate. 4 months after my arrival, we activated the new encryption system across the entire network. The results exceeded even our projections, 47% improvement in threat detection with 38% reduction in false positives.
The board was elated.
James began bringing potential clients and investors to tour our facility, proudly showcasing our cutting-edge security infrastructure.
Stephen, however, became increasingly isolated.
His attempts to undermine my project had been thoroughly documented in my regular updates to James. Several executives now bypassed him entirely, coming directly to me with questions about security and risk management.
Then came the company's annual all-hands meeting.
Traditionally, department heads presented their achievements and upcoming initiatives to the entire organization.
As the newest principal architect, I was scheduled to present last.
Stephen presented just before me, focusing on operational efficiencies his team had implemented, taking credit for several security improvements actually developed by my group.
I watched silently, cataloging each misrepresentation. When my turn came, I approached the podium calmly.
Before I discuss the security division's achievements, I'd like to clarify something from the previous presentation.
I displayed side-by-side screenshots of system logs.
These efficiency improvements were actually designed by Carlos Martinez from my team, who identified and resolved critical vulnerabilities in our authentication system last month.
I nodded toward Carlos in the audience. His innovation deserves proper recognition.
Stephen shifted uncomfortably in his seat as I continued through my presentation, highlighting each team member's contributions by name.
When I reached our financial impact projections, I paused. As you can see, our new security framework is exceeding all projected returns. But there's another financial initiative I'd like to address.
I displayed an anonymized graph showing salary adjustments across departments.
Phase 1 of our compensation equity review is complete. Affected employees will see adjustments in their next paycheck. A buzz of excited whispers filled the auditorium. In the spirit of transparency, I want to explain how these adjustments were calculated. I detailed the methodology, the market research, the internal equity considerations. This company's greatest asset is its people, all its people, not just those in leadership positions. Recognizing and fairly compensating everyone's contributions isn't just ethically right, it's strategic. Valued employees innovate more, collaborate better, and stay longer. The applause that followed was thunderous. From the corner of my eye, I saw Stephen slip out a side door. The next morning, James called me to his office. Stephen was already there, along with the HR director. Ms. Blackwood, James began formally, Stephen has raised some concerns about your management approach. Stephen sat with his arms crossed, a satisfied expression on his face. He believes your compensation initiative is creating division among the staff and undermining traditional authority structures. He's also suggested that you've been building what he calls a parallel power structure, encouraging employees to bypass established management chains. I see, I said calmly. And what are your thoughts on these concerns, James? He leaned back in his chair. Well, that's why we're here, to discuss. Actually, I interrupted, pulling out my tablet, before we continue, I'd like to share some relevant information. I connected my device to the room's display screen. Over the past 4 months, I've documented numerous instances of administrative obstruction directed at my team and our projects. I displayed a detailed spreadsheet with dates, incidents, and supporting evidence, suspended access credentials, corrupted project files, delayed equipment orders, budget allocations mysteriously reduced, implementation timelines altered without consultation. I scrolled through page after page. Each incident individually could be dismissed as an oversight. Together, they form a clear pattern of deliberate sabotage. Stephen's face flushed. This is absurd. You're manipulating routine administrative issues to create some conspiracy theory. I'm not finished, I continued. I also have documentation of credit misappropriation, innovations and improvements developed by my team that were presented as achievements of the operations division. I switched to video clips from various meetings showing Stephen taking credit for work he hadn't done. Most concerning, however, is this. I pulled up email exchanges Stephen had believed were private, communications instructing staff to delay or obstruct board-approved projects, direct violations of company policy and potentially fiduciary responsibility. The room fell silent. James's expression had transformed from concerned to stunned. How did you obtain those emails? Stephen demanded. Recipients who were uncomfortable with your instructions forwarded them to me. Quite a few people, actually. James finally found his voice. Stephen, is this accurate? It's completely taken out of context, he sputtered. This woman comes in here, disrupts established procedures, demands exceptional treatment. The encryption system she implemented will save us an estimated $12 million in breach prevention annually, James interrupted. The compensation adjustments affect less than 8% of our operating budget, while potentially reducing our historically high turnover rate. I'm not seeing the problem. The problem, Stephen said, his voice rising, is that she's undermining my authority. She went directly to you to get this job, bypassing proper channels. She demanded special treatment, special compensation. I demanded fair compensation, I corrected, for myself and for others. You know nothing about how this company operates. 6 months of experience here. Please. I've been in this industry for 12 years. And yet, I said quietly, you didn't recognize the potential of my encryption framework until the CEO pointed it out to you. You laughed when I stated my worth. You've been trying to sabotage my work since I arrived. Why? Because I refused to accept less than I deserved. James held up his hand. That's enough. Stephen, I need to speak with you privately. Ms. Blackwood, thank you for this information. We'll continue our discussion later. I gathered my materials and left, closing the door behind me. Through the not quite soundproof walls, I heard James's voice rise, completely unacceptable behavior, board will not tolerate. The company-wide email arrived the next morning, organizational restructuring effective immediately. Stephen Morrison will be transitioning to an advisory role.
The Security Operations Division will temporarily report directly to the CEO until a replacement is found. The following week, James called me back to his office. "I'd like to offer you a promotion," he said without preamble. "Vice President of Cybersecurity and Innovation. You'd oversee both security architecture and our new innovation lab." I raised my eyebrows. That's a significant expansion of responsibilities. With compensation adjusted accordingly, of course. He slid a paper across the desk. The figure made me blink twice. "You've demonstrated exceptional technical expertise," he continued, "but more importantly, you've shown leadership qualities we desperately need. You identify problems, develop solutions, and stand by your principles even when it's difficult. Those are rare traits in this industry." I studied the offer carefully. "And the compensation transparency initiative continues as planned?" "In fact, I'd like you to accelerate it. The board has reviewed the initial results and agrees we need to address these disparities company-wide." I nodded slowly. "In that case, I accept." 6 months after walking out of that humiliating interview, I sat at the head of the conference table in the same room where Stephen had smirked at my counteroffer. The space had been renovated, modern furniture, upgraded technology, even the lighting was different. But the transformation of the company culture was even more dramatic. The compensation review was complete. Every employee now understood exactly how their salary was determined and what they needed to do to advance. Productivity had increased 31%. Turnover had dropped by 60%. My encryption framework had been fully implemented across all client systems, generating savings that exceeded our most optimistic projections. 5 competitors had already approached us about licensing the technology. As the executive team filed in for our quarterly strategic planning session, I noticed a familiar face, a young woman clutching a portfolio, looking exactly as nervous as I had felt during my interviews. "Everyone," James announced, "this is Dr. Sarah Kim. She's joining us as our new AI security specialist." I smiled at her. "Welcome, Sarah. We're excited to have you here." After the meeting, she approached me hesitantly. "Ms. Blackwood, I just wanted to say, your work on quantum-resistant encryption has been revolutionary. It's why I wanted to join CyberVault." "Thank you. That means a lot." She glanced around to ensure privacy. "I also heard about what you did with the compensation structure. My previous employer had similar issues. It's inspiring to see someone actually solve the problem instead of just acknowledging it." I thought about my journey from being mocked in a job interview to transforming an entire company culture. "Never let anyone tell you what you're worth," I told her. "And never stay silent when you see others being undervalued." As she left, my phone buzzed with a news alert. My previous employer, the one where Marcus had taken credit for my work, was struggling after a major security breach. Their stock had dropped 40% in 6 weeks. I smiled and closed the notification. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to others, it's what you build for yourself and everyone around you. Remember, knowing your worth isn't arrogance, it's self-respect. And sometimes, it's the first step toward changing not just your career, but an entire industry.